Welcome back to the We the Patriots podcast, where after last week talking about war and different instances that might insinuate different parties coming into this wars going on all around the world, we are looking at all over the world again, talking about climate change, talking about protesting the war in Israel and Gaza, and let's get to talking a little bit about the significance of what these protests might be and the timing of them, why it might be a little bit suspect. Let's get right into it.
About this thing that's in my brain, it keeps me from wanting to go on, but I want some gain. Maybe a little fame. Yeah.
So today, I've been putting off a little bit on talking about these protests going on at our own universities here in America, only for one reason, and because to me, I wanted to see it play out. Always when it comes to these protests at a large scale, you got to look at funding, you got to look at what the motivations might be, what are they asking for. When the things are unrealistic, you wonder if it was just a movement thought up out of anger and not with much planning. Seems to be the case with a lot of the things going on at our universities here in America. But when you look out at a broader scale, and like I said, the whole reason that I started the show today was Greta Thunberg getting detained, actually, not arrested, getting detained once again. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before I get further into it, I do just want to say thank you guys for pumping up the views on the last couple episodes. Been looking good. One thing is, I want you guys to interact. If we're doing a terrible job, let me know. That way we could at least try to cater to you guys a little bit. Being a shot in the dark without any interaction, just a bunch of views doesn't really tell us what direction you guys want us to go. Doesn't tell us what you guys want to hear, because if all you guys want to hear about is war, I'll pump war content out. But the thing is, that stuff is grueling, takes a lot of research when you're talking about wars in history, and it really needs a lot of preparation. So would really be thankful you guys could hit us up, go like the video, share it out, and leave a comment on your thoughts. Let us engage a little bit and let's talk further in those comments. You can always go check us out at wethepatriotsmedia.com. Anything extra, we do some blog posts over there. It's been a bit, but we're going to get back on the wagon, and of course you can go shop some merch. So without any further ado, these protests. So first I want to talk about the stuff that's going on in general. The way that protests seem to be happening nowadays is that they love to call themselves peaceful, but here's my problem with that. Call yourself peaceful all you want, but when you're stopping people from living their lives or being able to work, being able to do what they would normally do, and that is your way of protesting, make as much of a scene as possible rather than being maybe righteously upset. I think it kind of changes and it makes it, in a way, not peaceful. Like I said, stopping people from their way of life, stopping traffic, stopping workflow, vandalizing places. This is where, to me, you lose the peaceful appeal of what a protest should be and why democracy is so amazing, because everybody gets their fair share and a voice and their opinion. And you degrade it by resorting to violent or maybe sub-violent tactics is a decent way of thinking about it. Let's talk about one thing. Let's talk about property damage. When you talk about people who are angry, is what you see. You see mob tactics. You see people banding together. You see people getting rowdy. I did see a video recently. I see if I can link it, of a bunch of students breaking in. I'm not sure if it was at Columbia or where this was in America. It was definitely American University, and breaking into the main hall of a campus because they couldn't open the door. And then you see the tents and the leave behinds of just trash, just complete destruction of an area, dereliction of real just human beings, and what it comes to be if you're going to stage a protest. Think about it for multiple days. Think about going on weeks. The amount of resources that you're going to need: food, water, okay, drinks, shelter, as well as places to go to the bathroom, maybe, right? Think about all these things, and you're going to camp out on a campus lawn for days on end. These things start to pile up, right? A lot of waste, a lot of trash. What this comes to be is, this is why I think it wasn't so planned by, a lot of people like to say, what are these funded by, or who's benefiting, who is paying all this money to support these protests? Well, sometimes it really is just, for lack of better terms, rich white kids who need some sort of cause. Um, and when it comes down to it, and the inability to fully prepare makes me think that it might have been more off the cuff than people might want to give credit. Now, that doesn't excuse the fact that they think they're being peaceful by destroying people's property. That doesn't excuse the fact that when it gets violent and only people that get blamed are the cops, you can understand why the confusion sets in as to why this isn't liked. You know, there's one thing to voice your opinion, and it's another thing, like I said, to get in the way of people. Like when you get in the way now, what it's come down to is certain universities is they're not going to have their actual graduation. They're not going to host it. They're not going to allow classes. They have online virtual classes to avoid these protests, avoid any violence coming out. That is starting to get in the way of people living their lives and getting in the way of an education that someone paid for, maybe getting in the way of someone earning their living, making any money as a professor. That's not even to talk about the professors who are having their jobs hunted down by these protesters who think that just because they are of a certain religion that they have an allegiance and they should be banned. Um, it really makes you think that, to me, that's no longer a peaceful protest. You are using violent tactics and revolutionary tactics in order to affect people's lives. To me, I can't say anything other than the fact that it is morally wrong, in my opinion. And more than that, like I said, you remove that peaceful from your protest. That is now a protest, and a possibly violent one. You think about this further, think about what's going on in the grand scheme of things and the fact that it's election year, so these things are going to get played up. And this stuff always seems to come up. And what it's been a lot of years in the past, I would say 3 or 4 election cycles in America, has been climate change. When you think about climate change protests, especially as of late, I haven't seen too much of it in America, right? And I think the reasoning for that is, generally speaking, when you look at the numbers at the higher end of pollution contributors, we're not, especially per capita, actually been working quite a bit on our numbers, and that went down a lot during Trump, believe it or not. And when you look at things like that, metrics like that, it just makes sense for protest numbers to start to decrease when it comes to that specific category. That doesn't mean protests don't happen. People need to be angry about something, especially when you don't have much cause in your life. And so that's also to be understood, I would say, by Americans, is understanding that protest is always going to be a part of our society, especially because we allow it. Now, us giving it attention, us giving it eyes, that's all on us. And that especially comes true when you're talking about international politics, which is where you're going to see, in my opinion, much more of, I think how I want to say this, you're going to have much more underlying causes and possibly much more of an opportunity, I would say, for different big factors to be playing in, maybe paying for the protest, maybe ensuring that a certain amount of people are getting to the protest, people getting paid for it. That's not unheard of. Um, And when you think about these things, they're happening for a reason at a time for a purpose. And I would say that is the case in what happened over in The Hague this weekend. Greta Thunberg getting detained, I was trying to find a number, and I think the reason that you can't find out how many times that she's been detained is because she was just that detained. She's never been arrested or charged with a crime. I don't think it's a crime anywhere she's been to protest, so she hasn't actually gotten charged with a crime. That's not to say it can't happen around the world, but where she is, it always seems to be kind of for show. She's getting arrested as she has a smile on her face. She's walking with no cuffs on. It's always something like this, and that's what I think people think, that it's always for staging purposes. But in reality, if the people aren't ever getting arrested, they're just being detained for maybe blocking a roadway, and maybe that's just not grounds for an arrest or for a charge where she's at. Well, it's very possible, but understanding what they're asking for when it comes to these, right? And I'll allude back to our Israel-Palestine protests in a little bit, but we talk about climate change. I think this is a really important topic for people to continue to talk about because it's an invasive topic in everyone's lives. When you think about the type of machinery that you can use on a daily basis, it's now not just affecting businesses, but affecting homeowners, especially in my area, living in New Jersey. Where you are and the laws that are all coming in, they all come from somewhere else. They originated from some sort of talk, some sort of collaboration And it's really, in my opinion, just seeing how far they can push it down the road. The one sad thing when it comes to the green movement is that we're all supposed to just forget about what could possibly be the cleanest burning fuel known to man, especially at this point, and that's nuclear power. That's where I don't understand how the argument doesn't die right there. If you're going to commit just a little bit more resources to almost infinite resource to us, to our needs, and you're just going to neglect it for something that is far less efficient, needs far much more maintenance, and is also really unreliable and relies a lot on the weather, whereas burning a fuel does not. It makes the movement seem disingenuous as long as you can make that argument. And as soon as you don't, you're going to try to make it out that we're in an existential crisis. This is where you lose me, and I'm sure a lot of you, when we're talking about the green movement, because I'm sorry, but the world is still turning. The sun is still shining. Places are changing. Of course, there always are. Climate's always changing. And when you look back on history, I'm sorry, but the number one thing to look out for when it comes to a climate perspective is actually a freeze, an ice age, not a hot zone. Hot zone is actually going to make the world flourish. Now, the water levels might rise up. Yes, that's for sure. But not to say that the temperature increasing is a good thing, but look at the alternative and you might just want to stop complaining. Okay. And you think back to the terrible years leading into the French Revolution when the crops were harvested at such a low rate, causing many issues stemming all the way from the bottom, all the way up to the top of the food chain when it came to France. And eventually they lost their status as a monarchy because of certain impacts of a very cold climate. Being hot is not the end of the world. Okay. What you're going to do to mitigate things, maybe you need flood barriers. Okay. Maybe you need to start creating seawalls. Whatever you need to do engineering wise, we've figured a lot of that out when it comes to just ingenuity, human ingenuity, and being able to adapt to a changing environment. But what we haven't really been able to figure out is how to continue to grow organic crop when the ground is frozen. Okay, I'm a landscaper. If you're thinking about planting anything in the winter, well, you better just hope and pray because it's going to be freezing. You're going to get, first of all, no shovel into the ground. Second of all, if you do, you have a machine to do it for you. You're almost guaranteeing that that plant ain't going to make it. I don't understand why we can't come together and come to some very, very obvious truths as it is in human beings and in our lives that some what may seem as purposeful degrading of the environment activities, such as farming, such as air travel, car travel for that matter. Some of these things might have to take on that form as a necessary evil, especially for the moment. Okay, who's to say, you look at the timetable of human evolution and how far we've come just in the past 50, 60, 70 years. Who's to say that fossil fuels need to be fueling our personal vehicles by the end of this century? When you think about it, we didn't have personal vehicles 200 years ago. We had personal animals called horses. And that was the fastest mode of transportation. That was the limit. So, who's to say that we won't be able to evolve to something that is hydrogen powered, water powered, right? It might take some time to develop, but utilizing what we have in the moment to its best degree as we have it, and not having a depleting resource as much as people think, actually having access to enough oil for the foreseeable future until we can come up with a better solution. Well, that sounds like a godsend moment for me, and I think it should for all of us as well. And understanding what they're saying, and I want to pull up this quote here from our activist, Miss Greta Thunberg. So she was I want to say arrested, but she was detained, and she said, this is a quote from her so that you guys can understand where they're coming from, where this climate protest is. Quote, "We are in a planetary emergency, and we are not going to stand by and let people lose their lives and livelihood and be forced to become a climate refugees when we can do something." When you're talking about a climate refugee, what you're saying is that a person's home is being made unlivable because of the climate. There are only certain instances of that happening, and it's not like you have this sea monster that keeps creeping up every year and this is the reason. No, the most that are going to be climate refugees, if you want to use her term, which is always dangerous when you're talking about, in my opinion, revolutionary term speak. It's Orwellian language, really. But furthermore, I mean, you're going to say a climate refugee. What you're really talking about is people who are displaced by earthquakes, by tsunamis, by hurricanes. Okay. Think about events like this and massive events that might take out human life, might sweep away actively a whole town, a village. Where do these people get displaced to? Well, the thing is about humans is that we have a massive ability, a fantastic ability, I should say, to rebuild and to do better the next time what wasn't done in the first place. And we're learning a lot about that, especially when it comes to, like home building, for example, and how when you think about down in Florida, the different roofing, like this is something that my uncle talked to me about, and how they're changing codes so that they make sure that they're protected from hurricanes and not being able to allow people to build roofs that are what they know to be failing before their deadline date, right? You talk about a 30-year roof that doesn't exist in Florida. So these things where we learn, we adapt, and we start building or engineering differently. Like that's just one small example, but think about the amount that we've had to build up to have building codes, to have engineering departments. This is stuff that does work its way out. And I think if the problem actually presented itself, her calling it an existential crisis in that quote, it really makes light, in my opinion, what we're actually going through as a human society, and this is worldwide, what we're actually watching, right? I think one of the big quotes that I took away from our show last week with Andrew was evil is always existing in some corner of the world. Okay. What you're going to do about it, what you're going to get yourself involved with in order to try to stomp out that evil, well, that's up to you as a society to determine what's so morally bad that you need to step in. But another thing is knowing that first part of the quote, that evil will always exist. And I think it's so important for us as Americans sitting here and being able to make a fair judgment on the situation at hand. I think it's important to realize. And I think it's important for us to recognize in ourselves that everything is not as extreme as people like to make it out to be, especially when you talk about politicians, when you're talking about activists, you're talking about people that really need, in essence, that urge. They need that event always to be happening, right? Because if they're not living in that life, what are they good for? How do they get paid? How do they get on the TV if there is no crisis? Well, thank God we have a lot of them. Okay. And it actually makes me think a lot about the psychology aspect. And I'm by no means am I read up enough on this, but it's something that I've been pondering lately, especially dealing with a decent amount of people who have anxiety in my life. Okay. Myself being even one of them. But an anxious person, this is according to some people who claim to be psychologists, anxious people will cause anxiety in their lives to make sure that they remain anxious. Because if things get too calm, things get too good, things get too cold, they feel out of place. And they actually need to cause that anxiety again. They start making themselves anxious before they start even involving their environment. By the next thing they know, they're anxious again. They set themselves a whole new set of problems. And I wonder if we do that to ourselves as a society. Do we seek that shitty news aspect so much, right? Is that what 24-hour news does to us? Do we want to always have something shitty to look at? Because when you think about it, we all know, I think, us that are old enough to think and honestly old enough to be clicking on a show like this, we all know that you're going to viscerally react a hell of a lot worse and more of a reaction in general to negative content. Positive content is not going to affect you as strongly, even if it really is positive to you and you click with it. It's not going to relate to you as well as negative content. And if we all know that, yet we continue to subscribe to it, what does that tell us about what our nation might be doing on a grand scale things? And I revert back to what we talked about last week. We talked about war. Andrew and I talked a lot about it, but us being already involved in World War III, what we really do believe to be World War III, well, it has a lot of ramifications that are really society wide. And I'll call it back again. I think one of the most important parts of that conversation was when we discussed, and go take a look at this, and I'll link it in the description because I think these two shows link a lot. When we talked about what it means as a society to start to lose your patriotism and to lose your will and be a lazy generation, so to speak, right? And what you need to get that back, right? The different the different tactics that leaders, governmental officials, the different things that they're willing to do in order to get that population going again, in order to get that economy rocking. And you look back off of the entire span of history, this is the moment when things like that are going to happen, right? So think about wars being maybe one of those instances where somebody might just be pushing for it for a reason that we are not even thinking about. And it could be as simple as our generation, our country has gone soft and we need to get them hard and ready again. I am done for this week. I want you guys to just simmer on these 2 episodes. Like I said, I really appreciate you going out, watching last week's episode. I want you guys to engage. Let me know what you think and let me know how you feel about people protesting in the ways that they do nowadays. Like I said, you're going to be blocking traffic. You're going to be causing people problems getting to work, or even just participate, going to a library, things like this. To me, you start to lose all favor with the regular population as well. And it's counterproductive to your entire organization to do so. Why would you do a protest to piss people off? Don't you want to do a protest in order to make sure that people understand there's something better to be had? Just my thought of the day. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll get back to you
I wish
next
I
Monday.
would've fucking
Peace out.
stayed. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.